If you've been going to, I noticed one or two of the morning talks have been talking about flip teaching already, but forgive me, I didn't realize people would be listening to this before. So what we're trying to do is really just turn things on its head, do things a little bit differently to reach the new generation. And the following slide is one I always give to the students when I'm explaining to them why I do things the way I do it, because I think it's really important to manage expectations right at the beginning. And so I tell them in the beginning we had a monk. The monks could read and write and the ordinary people couldn't. And if the monk had a brilliant idea and he then wanted to go and test that idea, but he discovered that really on a faraway country in a castle somewhere there was somebody who could help him to understand this topic a bit better. And we'd often have to undertake a journey that was long and arduous in order to get to the place that held that knowledge, because books were very scarce and expensive and a lot of people didn't have them. And he would spend a significant amount of time there actually trying to understand this new topic and this new idea that he had to see whether it was feasible. And then he would go back. But once he was back, he would then gather some people around him. He would sit there and gather people around him so that he could then transmit this idea verbally. And that's how it worked for many, many hundreds of years when it was so expensive and so difficult to transmit knowledge. And if you keep that in your mind and we look what we're doing today, so we still have somebody transmitting knowledge verbally to people in an audience. Now, but we've come some way. Unfortunately, the students might actually become that, which is not what we want. The other thing in our subject is the fact that we're trying to teach skills, not necessarily just facts. And skills are not taught by telling people. They have to do. And in the old days, when a person had a son, yes, they were sons, you would apprentice them, you would pay the apprentice to teach that person. It would take 3 to 4 or 5 years, and then at the end they would be able to be signed off themselves as somebody who had those skills. But you wouldn't just tell them about the skills and expect them to do things. And I mean, it's a fact that you can't learn skills by watching somebody, you have to do it yourself. I always say one of my sons can juggle. I think it's amazing, but I definitely can't juggle. And I've watched him do it many times, but I can't do it. So with traditional lecturing, you create the slides, you present the slides to the class. The students are then given activities. They're told to go and apply the stuff you've told them about, and then you hope they're going to develop those skills, but a lot of the time they get stuck. And then, because the lecturer realizes they're getting stuck, they bring them back into a lecture theatre and solve things in front of them, thinking that somehow this is going to transmit the skill, but we're fooling ourselves because it doesn't. And basically the premise on which traditional lecturing is based is that a particular person has the knowledge, that he or she needs to impart it, that he obtains this knowledge from a scarce resource. If you go back to the monk, that was true. That the most efficient way of doing this is to get a whole bunch of people in a room and tell them all at the same time. So if we look at that, those premises, are they still true today? Well, yes, I do possess the knowledge. Number 2, I do need to transmit it to a number of people. But it's not a scarce resource. Anybody can find that knowledge out there on the web. It's all there. And the most efficient way, clearly, is not for me to tell them. And so, because 2 of those premises are no longer true, we have to think about different things. Moreover, what's happened since the monk is, my goodness, books are not expensive anymore. I buy books regularly for a penny on Amazon. So anybody can get the knowledge, and if you don't have the inclination to buy a book, you can find some knowledgeable person who's written about it on the web, or you can get your friends to tell you. Everyone's connected in the world today. So it's no longer necessary to go to the source of all knowledge who happens to live in the monastery close to you. You can go to the expert now and go directly to them and hear that. You can read about it on Google, you can get the information, but the real problem is that we need to guide this journey of discovery, because there's a lot of rubbish out there as well. And so what's the expert's role is no longer the fount of all wisdom, but now guidance. Now, Eric Mazur was the first person to talk about flip teaching. And he kind of turned the whole thing on his head, and he said we have to get the students to be primed. You have to get them to read the easy stuff first, and in the lectures, you take them a bit further. So now you're priming them with the easy stuff, and then you lead them on, and you let them talk in the lectures, and you let them discuss, and then they learn, because they have time to debate things with other people. And at the end of the course, students find that they have the skills, because they've actually practiced them during the lectures, and not on their own, struggling on their own, but actually doing it with other people. And what we find is the people that can understand more. And Monsieur is really quite inspirational. I read some of his stuff, and Quentin, who's in my school, also gave me a lot of help. So the traditional way of doing it is that you tell them stuff, and they go off and work by themselves. But when we do first exposure in classroom, harder stuff on their own. But what we want to do is for them to do prep. And then for us in the classroom to have discussions and maybe present some of the more advanced stuff and taking it deeper. So I'm going to hand over to Gareth for the next slide.
So what I did was I became interested in computing, well, teaching computing, because I did tutoring in my second year, where I tutored Python for first year pupils. And then I also in the summer got invited to Germany to teach English. So I had a little bit of a background in teaching, and in fourth year we have a course here in the computing science department called Computing in the Classroom. And there you join in the STEM ambassador scheme, where you go in and you spend 10 half days in the classroom and experience what it's like in the classroom. You watch different teaching styles, and you also deliver 2 different workshops. And I did some observation, and the teacher gave me the opportunity to deliver a whole bunch of things, so classes. He just said, well, when you're in, why don't you just do what you feel like doing, which was quite nice. So so I really enjoyed doing that course, and that's what got me interested in actually pursuing a career in teaching. So I went on to do my first training year, and in that year I was placed across Hermitage and Lomond secondary schools, and I had learned underneath this exact structure in usable security in the computing science department over here. And I found that the structure was really good, where we were getting rid of all the sort of the boring sitting absorbing time at home, where we got stuff to read, some papers to read, and we'd come in and we start really discussing with different students in the class in the lecture theatre exactly what this was about. So I decided to try this in computing as well. So should we just continue? You can, yeah.
Sure.
So I applied the technique that you're going to see in the next slide in my first year, my training year, and it worked really well. So
okay. So we have 2 slides now to just demonstrate how quickly the world is changing and how the nature of how we do things is changing. So I got this picture off the BBC website of when Usain Bolt won the 100 meters in Beijing in 2008, and the crowd is congratulating him, you know, really wanting to tell this man how amazing he is. And then I got the same man won the same race in London in 2012, and I managed to find another picture which was fairly comparable. And what you're seeing is people aren't shaking his hand anymore, they're taking photographs. And it really just demonstrated to me how the world has changed, in that, you know, we used to have to be in the same place, but now we can tell our friends in another country, look where I was. So we're more interested in kind of sharing and learning in little bits and pieces. And there's another example which one of my students found last year, which is Bill Clinton winning the election in '97 and Obama winning in 2013. And once again, it's just a sea of mobile devices. And everybody's carrying those things. Everybody wants to now use these things as every part of their lives. Am I doing this one?
Introduce and then I'll explain.
Okay. So I designed the course this way with a great deal of help from Quentin. And I gave the students some prep to do, and I tried to keep that really down to less than an hour. I didn't want to make it arduous. Sometimes the prep was go and watch a YouTube video to understand something. Sometimes it was here's an academic paper, but I really didn't expect it to be hard. I made it fairly easy, or go and investigate this, or go and find out what this term means or whatever. Monday, I always started with a quiz. It was a 1 sheet on one side of a piece of paper with 3 or 4 questions. It wasn't hard. They could score really well on the quiz if they'd read the work. If they hadn't read the work, I could see it immediately. That kind of primed them. And then on Monday, I would take them further. I would give them the most advanced topics, and then I had a little activity, maybe 10 minutes. Then during the week, I would give them some task. Now they're interested in the topic, and you accentuate that. You give them a little bit more to do to investigate more. And on Fridays, we have a discussion in the class, I give them some activity to apply all this knowledge that they've now learned.
So, this is exactly the model that I did in musical security in the 4th year, and I decided to apply this for teaching programming and other concepts as well. So, the main thing with school that is different from university, though, is that often a lot of people don't do their homework. They're not. You're going to get half the class sometimes that come in, oh, sorry, I forgot to do the homework, forgot to do the reading. So the way to motivate that was I made the tests significantly complex, as in they would be able to answer the core questions that they needed to continue with the lesson that day, but they wouldn't be able to feel the satisfaction that they completed the test fully. So if they hadn't done the reading, they wouldn't be able to answer every single question, but they would be able to answer the questions that they needed for that day, for the work that they're going to do. I found that worked quite well, and within 2 weeks I had the children doing the reading because they wanted to be able to answer every question. Even though it was an open book test and they had the sheet that I had given them the previous time to read, they had it next to them. The questions not just fact checking, but also understanding. So they would have to, it's not just a case of looking at the sheet and finding the answer and writing it, copying it in. It's understanding the concepts that they've read and then applying those to the questions. So it's not a simple case of just filling in a test from the source sheet over here.
I'm just going to give you 3 examples of the kind of things. So this course was a usable, so human-centered security course, and it was really about where the human and security systems meet. And humans find it very hard. Anybody here has probably got loads of passwords that you can't remember. You'll sympathize. Those are the kinds of things we address. You know, what can we replace passwords with? We talk about privacy, various things. And these are just 3 examples. So the first one was this technique called social engineering, where people will just go into an organization and try to fool people into giving them information that they shouldn't give them. Or could you please plug this USB stick into your machine, and which actually installs a bunch of bad software. And what this was about was, how do you help an organization to harden themselves against those sorts of attacks? Because they're attacking the human. And so what I said to the students was, well, here's a scenario, and pretend you're a social engineer. What kind of techniques would you use? And the whole class comes out with all these cool techniques. And then I say, right, now put yourself in the shoes of the person who's trying to protect that organization. How would you defend against those techniques? Now, once they've put themselves in the mind of the person trying to attack, they're much more effective with trying to come up with solutions. And they love that one. They actually love that kind of activity. The second one is that a lot of people don't really know how to use encrypted email. They don't know how to sign and encrypt emails. And most of the products out there to allow people to do that are quite difficult to use. And so as one of the weeks, what I do is I explain the difficulties, and then I send them away and tell them to go design an email client. Not program it, just design the interface that will make it really easy, and what metaphors would you use and that sort of thing. And they come up with amazing stuff. I think the year he did it, one of the students said, well, we'll provide a Facebook-like interface and people will just understand what's going on, which was great. And then I get a bunch of my colleagues in, and we do a dragon's den. And the colleagues then choose one of the things that they're going to let the student, that they're going to so-called give money to this thing to develop. And the last one is privacy. This is a really difficult issue because people kind of split into groups. So some people are really concerned about their privacy and other people aren't. And the real thing about privacy that's hard is that people who don't care don't understand why people care. And people who really care a lot don't see how people can not care. And my real task in that week for that topic is to get them to see each other's point of view. And so I give them a scenario and say, right, you may not sympathize with that guy who wants his privacy, but you have to design the system to respect that. And I give them a scenario which is quite, emotive, which is a health one. And I say, you're going to design a system for this. How would you build those things in? And it makes them think. But the interesting thing about this course is there are no right answers. And that's very uncomfortable for a technical student to accept, that there's no one way. But there are many ways, and you have to accept other people's differences. Okay.
Okay, so one of the things that we had to do, which we actually did for enterprise computing in 4th year, was designing a mobile phone for the elderly. And this is actually something, well, one of the reasons I got interested in teaching computing was that I think we have a really, really good opportunity. Well, it's not really easy a lot of the time to get kids interested because all of them have mobile phones. And one of the things that I find whenever a new class, when I'm teaching a new class, or I'm doing a cover class, whenever the pupils find out I'm a computing teacher, oh sir, do you know how to hack? Will you teach us how to hack? Will you teach us about security and all the rest of things? So it's actually really easy, I think, in a lot of cases, to get kids excited about what they're about to learn, which is what appealed to me about getting into this. So the designing the mobile phones, that was thought of because we wanted to have lots of different things to appeal to different learners. So we have the computing side, where they have to think about app development and mobile phone design. We have marketing, so we have to think about our market segments. And we also have HCI, so we're thinking about the users and how we're going to meet the users' needs. So there's a whole different series of things that we can approach there. And at the moment, I'm delivering this workshop for IDL classes. I'm not sure if any of you have been given IDL slots, but my school is still putting into place a program for IDL, and we're actually finding this is quite useful. It's being run across several IDL classes. The next thing was online safety, where they all want to know how to hack each other's Facebook profiles. So this one is very, very easy to sell, and I'll show that to you in a bit. So here are some of the examples of the mobile phones that we're coming up with. The first years tend to come up with really, really interesting designs and ideas, and usually it's on some sort of fruit, because of Apple's influence on the mobile phone industry. So I've got some interesting examples here. One of the things that they had to do was come up with phones for the elderly, and they had to go and research at home. They had to interview their grandparents, find out what their grandparents actually wanted in their phones, because to challenge their misconceptions about old people not wanting apps on their phones, not wanting anything interesting to do, just to call and to text. And they discovered this, and then they designed a phone for their grandparents. And as you can see, well, one of the interesting things was a hard starting app, and we've got easy to understand. They understood the needs of hearing, all the rest of these things. So got some really interesting ideas out of this, and the pupils really enjoyed it. The next one is the Facebook social engineering exercise, where they get given 2 Facebook profiles, and they have to look at the information that's inside the profiles and guess the user's passwords. This one, the pupils perform really well in, actually, and they do guess very, very reasonable passwords for these profiles. And when they find out how well they've done, they're quite surprised. And the way we can follow that through is to ask them about their own Facebook profiles and what they would do with their Facebook profiles to make them a bit stronger, so that people can't just look at them and try and guess their passwords. So the next one was a social engineer exercise, which I just delivered last week, actually. And this was the one where we give them a scenario of, this is a street, there's a bunch of businesses here, there's the office, and they have to think of a way to infiltrate that office without the people in the office knowing they've been there. And once they've thought about plugging a USB stick into this server over here, which plants their little virus to steal the data that they're looking for, they then have to, so they come up with a bunch of ideas. Some of the ideas are, oh, we'll go in there, set off the fire alarm, plant it, and leave. Or we'll sneak in after somebody from the smoking shelter, after somebody's had a cigarette. So there's a lot of ideas that you wouldn't expect children to have, but they come up with them. Or we'll sneak in the window if the manager's not in his office and sneak back out, sort of thing, you know? And then after that, we'd ask them, how would you strengthen security for this company? And they come up with some really good ideas. One of the best ones is, why don't we put a lock on the door? So, and some pupils come up with a really simple idea, and some pupils come up with, oh, let's put a biometric system in place with retinal scans and hand scans and all the rest of that. So I think this gets them quite excited.